I wanted to get an idea as to really how people perceive Chopin as a man, but primarily as a performer and as a pianist. So I researched that, and I wrote an article, which took me a little while to research. And I'm not a historian or a musicologist, but I've studied my composers, and I've studied history, and have developed over the years a certain expertise in the area. And it was a really interesting project because it allowed me to look at my music differently and to understand it differently, and also the period, the romantic movement, and what it was like in France historically at that time. There was a terrible cholera pandemic, as a matter of fact, at the time, and what it was like for him to live in Paris as an immigrant alone, and how he carved out his career. And so doing that research on his life in detail was a great way to bring something new to what I'm doing as a pianist.
Yeah, absolutely. Research is very important. You need to know, if you want to be a pianist or a composer, you need to know the background and where you're coming from and explore it, as much as you can. You need to embrace it and know it if you want to get into it.
That's right, absolutely. There's one small item which I know you probably have heard from your other guests, and that is, and it's actually a very important item. Sometimes you have to take some days off, and you have to go to the museum. You've got to go out and walk in the park. You've got to get out to the lake and really unplug. Because if you don't unplug and you don't recharge your batteries, it can be a real problem. And I think it's critically important to remember that, especially in the stressful period in which we're all living right now. Around the world, I think it's something where people have to really remember to take the time to just unplug and to do something so you can go into nature, or you can read or learn something different, and then that brings to your music a more richness, and also makes you more physically prepared to perform.
Absolutely. Yeah, you need to practice, and you don't want to wear yourself out, because if you enjoy it, there's no use in wearing yourself out. You have to take breaks, but that doesn't mean stop work completely, but you have to recharge, and that can be said in anything in life.
Absolutely. An interesting little story is that I didn't play the piano for about 6 weeks. There was a quarantine here in France. And I've been based in Paris since about 1992, but I've come back to the States a lot. But I've been based here, and the quarantine here was quite strictly enforced. So I wasn't at my piano. I was actually in Brittany. But the fact that I wasn't playing the piano for several weeks kind of made me panic a little bit. But then I realized that a lot of the big works that I play, it's almost like a wine. It has to mature in the, in those oak barrels, and you come back to the music after taking the pause, and you really perform better, and the music has aged like a fine wine or like good cheese, and it's true. I mean, even performances as an actor, I think that's probably the same experience. You come back to the work after a pause, and it has matured. Works need time to mature. If you're playing a piece, it takes time. You have to learn a piece and then spend 3 months and then then put it aside. You have to really put it aside for a period of time. It has to mature.
Yeah, absolutely. Slow and make it process. It's not good to rush it and go fast and everything, because it may go by quick, as rushing it, but the product is not good. You want to make it slow and, maturely and naturally,
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's true.
Absolutely. My next question is, and I know we talked a little bit about it, but do you have any other pieces of advice for people who want to get into the career you as a composer or a pianist? What is your advice?
It's a hard question because each person has their own way and their own path. But it's, I guess what I would say, with my experience as someone who had a different career, but always maintained piano, I like to call it was always my first among equals. And I guess by that I mean I had a passion for for history, for politics, international relations, and of course business. But What I think is so important is to simply not give up your passion. And it's easy to say that, but looking back on it now, I realize that the most important thing is to never, ever give up and never give in to naysayers, because people can often be naysayers and they can do it unintentionally. They're not trying to necessarily criticize or be mean, but for whatever reason, they'll dismiss what you're doing, and it can be very hurtful. I think for young people, especially going into to a career which is very, very challenging. But you can't give up on your passion, so you have to be confident that your talent and what you're expressing is worth hearing. And it's worth expressing. And it's important for you to do that because it's you who are doing it. And if you believe in that, and of course there are challenges, of course there are a lot of obstacles, and of course, you have to think about practical things and how you're going to, survive and how you're going to make ends meet, and there are other considerations, family, and other constraints and other difficulties, but you simply can't give up on your passion. And I like to say it's almost like going into a desert and realizing that that you've got no water. I mean, it's like dying of thirst. And I think that's that's something you have to keep in mind. You will die of thirst maybe inside a little bit in your soul, because you simply have to believe in yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very important, Forget about everyone else. First, you have to believe in yourself and get confident in your own self, and then let everything else flow and move on,
Another thing I'd say, Trey, to answer that is that you have to believe in circumstance and chance, and you have to be open to chance encounters. And by that I mean I don't personally believe that anything really is completely chance. I had a neighbor, as a story, I had a neighbor in my building here in Paris, and by complete chance, she was a professor at the Conservatory of Paris. And one day, not long after I moved in, I had been practicing the piano, coming home late, tired after a long day of work at the office. But I would play every night at least a couple of minutes every single day. I'd play maybe sometimes only 10 minutes, sometimes I'd play 2 or 3 hours if I got back earlier. But she heard me play, and she came up to my apartment and introduced herself, which is not always the case in Paris because people tend to stay to themselves in buildings in Paris. And it was from this encounter that I began to study again seriously. I went then back to the conservatory later on, but I continued to study with her, and she has become a real force in my life and has been a coach to me over the years, over the last 7 or 8, intensively. And it was by chance, and she understood where I was coming from, and she introduced me to some tremendous repertoire that I had never played before, and I learned a lot from her. She was a tremendous teacher in her day, and had retired, and it was by chance. And so you have to stay open to those kinds of meetings in life. You have to sort of allow things to happen that will lead you in one direction or another. And it's probably the most important meeting in some ways in my life after my own teachers, Mrs. Reese, and of course my father.
Absolutely, yeah. There are always chances and opportunities, and the best thing to do is go for them. You can always close the door on them, but just walk through it first. And
exactly.
Absolutely, it's an interesting career to be in, acting and composing and all that. It's connected all in a way, some sort of way. But
it is. A lot of performing is the presence that you have on the moment that you enter, and well before the moment that you actually sit down at the piano. So there has a lot of stage craft in being a concert pianist. And it's true that acting skills, or at least how you project yourself on a stage, and in different kinds of concert situations, is critically important. So yes, you're right. I mean, I was in a singing group when I was at Yale. It was called the Spizwinks. And I learned a lot about how to perform by singing some of the old, college songs and show tunes, Broadway tunes, which we'd arranged, in our singing group, and some of the comical skits and things like that. I mean, I learned a lot about how to perform, not by being a pianist, but by getting up there and singing. I was a bass. I was a pretty bad bass too. I always had the boring parts, but I learned a lot about that. And it's true. There's a lot of common elements.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's wonderful, and as long as you enjoy it, you'll keep doing it, and
It's true. It's true. I mean, the great thing about music is that you can continue on in many ways, not necessarily as a concert pianist, but you can continue to contribute, to teach, and write. I love the story of Pablo Casals, the great cellist, probably the greatest cellist of the 20th century. And a journalist asked him, he said, Mr. Casals, you're 94, and you're still practicing every day, 8 hours a day. What makes you, why do you keep practicing every day? And he turned to the journalist, he said, because I think I still have room for improvement. He was 95. I think actually he was 95 when he answered that question. So I just love that story. I think that says a lot.
And it's very true. You can always improve no matter what age or part of life you're in. You can always improve. Mm-hmm. And that's what life is about, constantly improving and moving along and everything. Enjoying life as you can,
It is. No matter how well you think you played, you can always play better. Always. Even Horowitz would have said that, and even Rubinstein would say that. I'm certain. In fact, just another little anecdote. My father was, I guess he was, let's see, he was, I guess he was in his mid-40s, and I was about 12. And he took me down to the concert hall in L.A., the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. And Rubinstein was performing that night. And so he and I went to hear him. And, of course, I was very excited because Rubinstein was my idol, still is. And I heard Rubinstein play the Etude by Chopin, the Opus 25 No. 1. It's called the Aeolian Harp Etude. And it's probably his most famous etude. And I heard Rubinstein play this etude, and at the very end of the piece, Rubinstein made a few small mistakes. And at the end of the piece, he got up, he turned to the audience, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, with your permission, I'd like to play this again." And, of course, he sat down, he played the etude flawlessly the second time. And that concert has stuck with me, and seeing Rubinstein, stand up and tell everybody, I want to go back and play this piece again, because he knew he wanted to improve it, and he knew he could do better.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very important, to improve. Mm-hmm. Well, Walter, thank you very much for letting me interview you. It's been fun talking to you, and I've enjoyed listening to your stories and your career. Thank you very much for letting me talk to you, and I'm glad we're finally able to do this. And
well, Trey, I'm happy to be with you.
Thank you, and I'll send you a link to the interview once it's up on YouTube and iTunes, so you can listen to it.
No, I'm looking forward to it. This has been really a pleasure. I'm so glad we could work it out, Trey. That's great.
Thank you very much. You have
you have a nice evening, okay?
You too.
Or rather, a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you. And that was composer and pianist Mr. Walter Witt. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope we gave you some informative information and entertainment like always. Thank you very much, and as always, God bless.